Charleston, 1868. Clara Whitfield survives as an archivist under a false name, burying her past along with her father's, a merchant destroyed by fraud. When General Edmund Carlyle arrives at the office where she works, he brings more than documents. He brings the name of the man who ruined her family. United by a common enemy, they work together in silence and mounting danger, while something harder to name grows between them. She never asked to be saved. He never planned to stay. But when everything she has built is threatened, he acts, and she finally understands what it means not to walk alone. The air in the law office of Pembroke & Sons tasted of dust and damp paper. It was a taste Clara Voss knew as intimately as her own breath. Here, behind her tall desk in the corner, she was a ghost in brown wool, her presence noted only by the precise columns of figures that materialized in the ledgers under her hand. The late afternoon light, weak and diluted by the perpetual Charleston haze, fell across her workspace in a tired rectangle. It illuminated the grain of the wood, the glass pot of ink, and the spine of a small, worn notebook she kept beneath the blotter. Its cover was soft with age, its edges frayed. It never left this desk. The scratch of her pen was the only sound until the street door groaned on its hinges. Boots, heavy, deliberate, and unhurried. They crossed the threshold and stopped. Clara did not look up. Men in boots were a common feature of Charleston in 1868. Soldiers, contractors, opportunists from the north. They came for land records, shipping manifests, proof of ownership in a city where all previous proofs had been burned or lost. They rarely saw the archivist. The property records for the warehouse on the wharf, lots 7 through 9. The voice was like riverstone, smooth, cold, and unyielding. It held no courtesy, only expectation. Clara's pen completed the number 7 in the credit column before she lifted her gaze. The uniform filled her vision. Union blue, so dark it was nearly black in the dim office. The brass buttons were planets in a severe constellation, the gold braid on his shoulders marking a constellation of its own, a brigadier general. He stood with a posture that seemed to reject the very concept of fatigue, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a study in controlled authority. He was not handsome in any conventional way. His features were too hard, too carved by wind and decision. His eyes, a storm gray, held hers without a flicker. She did not rise. Those records are held by the Municipal Archive General. This is a private firm. Brigadier General, he corrected, the tone flat, factual. Carlyle, the municipal copies are incomplete. Your employer represented the seller. The originals will be here. A silence stretched, thin and taut. He did not fidget. He simply waited, his eyes now performing a swift, tactical assessment of her, the severe knot of hair, the dress devoid of crinoline or color, the hands stained with a faint shadow of ink. He saw a woman who had made herself a piece of office furniture. Clara placed her pen in its rest. Mr. Pembroke is at the circuit court. Without his express permission, the files of active cases cannot be disturbed. For the first time, something shifted behind the grey eyes. Not anger, but a spark of recognition. He had encountered a wall, and he was noting its construction. Then obtain his permission. It was a command, stripped bare, the kind given on a battlefield or in a conquered city. Clara held his stare for a heartbeat longer than was wise. There was a challenge in it, a tiny, silent rebellion that cost her everything to muster. Then, with a slight, stiff nod, she stood. Her skirt whispered against the wooden leg of the stool as she moved past him, toward the inner office door. She felt the weight of his gaze on her back, a physical pressure between her shoulder blades. The inner office was empty, stale with the smell of cigar smoke. She did not need to seek permission. Pembroke kept a written authorization for standard military requests in his top drawer, a necessary concession to the new reality. Her fingers, steady and cold, retrieved the slip of paper. She stared at the flourishing signature, a symbol of compliance. For a wild second she considered tearing it. She did not. When she returned, he had not moved a muscle. He might have been a statue titled Occupation. She carried a tied bundle of papers, the ribbon faded red. Mr. Pembroke grants access for review, she said. her voice devoid of the triumph she did not feel. "The documents may not leave the premises. You may use the consultation room." She led him to a small, airless chamber off the main room, containing a scarred table and 2 chairs. She laid the bundle down. The room seemed to shrink with him inside it. "Will you require anything else, General?" "No." She turned to leave, the word a dismissal she was not entitled to give. "Your name?" Clara stopped, her hand on the doorframe. The wood was smooth and cool. She did not look back. "Voss." "Clara Voss." There was no reply. Only the sound of a chair being drawn out, and the soft rasp of his gloves against the paper bundle as he untied the ribbon. Back at her desk, the silence of the office was different. It was now a shared silence, partitioned by a thin wall. Every rustle of paper from the consultation room was a distinct event. She opened her ledger, but the numbers blurred. Her attention was pulled, like a needle to a magnet, to the closed door. She found herself listening for the cadence of his breathing, the subtle shift of wool against wood. An hour bled away. The grey light at the window deepened into twilight. The occasional clatter of a carriage on the cobblestones outside seemed to come from another world. Finally, the door opened. He emerged, the documents retied with a knot that was neat, symmetrical, and utterly military. He placed them on the corner of her desk with a soft thud. "It is done," he stated. His eyes swept past her, out the window to where the first lamps were being lit along Broad Street. The rain had ceased, but the air hung thick with promised damp. "My carriage is outside. The rain will return. I will take you home." The offer was delivered as a logistical report. "Enemy sighted. Rations low. The archivist requires transport." Clara closed her ledger with deliberate care. She slid her pen into its case, blotted the inkwell. She stood and retrieved her plain coat and unadorned bonnet from the stand. When she faced him, her expression was a mask of polite stone. "Thank you, General. It is not necessary." She walked toward the street door. "It is over a mile to the commercial district," his voice came, no warmer but persistent. A statement of fact. Clara opened the door. The evening air, cool and smelling of wet brick and horse, washed over her. "I am accustomed to it," she said, and stepped out into the deepening blue of the Charleston dusk without a backward glance. General Edmund Carlyle did not move. He stood in the center of the quiet office, the ghost of her presence lingering in the chill draft from the door. Slowly, as if completing a final item on a mental checklist, he walked to the large window that overlooked the street. Below, the slight figure of Clara Voss appeared on the sidewalk. She did not hunch against the coming night or quicken her pace. She walked with a straight-backed, economical grace, her head held at an angle that was neither defiant nor defeated, but simply present. She navigated the puddles on the uneven stones without breaking stride, a shadow moving through other shadows. He watched. She reached the corner of Meeting Street and paused, a tiny hesitation as a Union patrol wagon rattled past. Then she turned and was gone, swallowed by the narrow lane. Carlyle remained at the window, his hand resting on the cold sill. He stared at the empty space where she had vanished. A distant church bell tolled the hour. Across the street, a lamplighter moved his ladder. Inside his chest, a familiar, hollow ache echoed, the one that came from witnessing a quiet, stubborn courage that asked for no witness at all. He had seen it in the eyes of his youngest lieutenant at Antietam, holding a shattered flag. He saw it now in the retreating back of a woman in a brown coat. The first heavy drops of returning rain began to hit the window pane, distorting the view of the empty street. Still, he did not move. He watched the rivulets trace paths down the glass, as if waiting for the ghostly outline to reappear. It did not. Only when the street was fully dark, glistening under the gaslight, did he turn from the window. He collected his hat from the stand, his movements precise. He extinguished the single lamp she had left burning on her desk, plunging the office into darkness, save for the faint glow from the street. 2 days later, at the same hour, the street door of Pembroke and Sons groaned once more. Clara's pen froze above a column of expenses. Her breath caught, a tiny involuntary hitch in her throat before she could master it. He stood there again in the same spot, a sentinel in blue, no papers in his hands, no official pouch, just him and the weight of his attention. "The warehouse records," he said, the words falling into the silent room. There is a discrepancy in the witness signatures. I need to verify them. Clara looked from his empty hands to his impassive face. The grey eyes held hers, offering no explanation, no excuse. He had no legitimate reason to be here. The knowledge hung between them, a third presence in the dusty office. She gave the slightest nod, her own face a mirror of his neutrality. The consultation room is available, General. The General's return was a stone dropped into the still pond of Clara's routine. The ripples disrupted everything. He moved past her desk toward the consultation room, a current of cold air and wool in his wake. The documents, Miss Voss. His use of her name was a deliberate pinprick. She retrieved the same tied bundle from the filing cabinet, her fingers steady only through force of will. When she entered the small room, he was already seated, his gloves removed, and laid neatly beside him on the table. His bare hands were a surprise, long-fingered, scarred across the knuckles, but clean. They looked like the hands of a scholar who had been forced to build his own fortifications. She placed the bundle before him. Is there a specific signature you wish to verify? I am familiar with the file. He looked up, his gaze level. The notary public, Jameson. The date of his seal contradicts the date of the bill of sale by 3 days. Clara blinked. She had processed that file herself. She remembered the crisp, professional signature of the notary, the smudged date on the bill of sale from the frantic, bankrupt seller. She had noted the inconsistency, filed it away as a common clerical error in the war's chaotic aftermath. It was a tiny flaw, invisible to anyone not examining the documents with, what? Suspicion? A predetermined purpose? A common error, she said, her voice tighter than she intended. Many records from that period are disordered. Disorder is one thing, he said, untying the ribbon. Fraud is another. The word hung in the close air. Fraud. It was a word that tasted of ash and old grief. Clara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This firm does not engage in fraud, General. I did not say the firm did. He did not look at her as he spoke. He was already spreading the papers, his eyes scanning them with a predator's focus. The discrepancy is in the municipal copy as well, which suggests the error, if it is one, originated here, or someone took great care to replicate it. He spoke as if to himself, thinking aloud. Clara stood rooted to the spot, her role as mere archivist evaporating. For what purpose? The question escaped her before she could cage it. Now he did look at her. The grey eyes were analytical, assessing her interest. The warehouse was purchased by a holding company 6 weeks after this sale, a northern holding company, at twice the recorded price. The original seller saw none of that profit. He had already fled the city, ruined. Many were ruined, Clara whispered, the words like ground glass in her throat. Not all by battle, he replied, his voice low. He held up the bill of sale. This document, if legally sound, transfers ownership. But if the notary's date is false, if his license had lapsed, or if he was already deceased, then the sale is voidable. The holding company's claim rests on a foundation of sand. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. Jameson died of a fever in the winter of 1866. His notary license had lapsed 3 months before his death. Any document he certified after that date is void under federal law, and the man who kept him on his private payroll regardless is a vulture named Nelson Price. He is in Charleston now, applying for federal rail concessions. The name Nelson Price struck Clara like a physical blow. The air left the room. The walls seemed to sway. She knew that name. It was etched in the margins of the worn notebook beneath her blotter, in a different, beloved handwriting. It was a name spoken in her father's broken voice during his final feverish nights. She must have made a sound, a faint gasp, because the general's scrutiny intensified. You know the name. It was not a question. Clara's mask, so carefully maintained for years, had cracked. She could feel the fissure spreading across her face. She forced a stiff shake of her head. I have seen it. On other documents. A financier from Boston. The same, Carlyle said, watching her with unnerving stillness. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. Price is a cancer. He consumes failing enterprises and sells the pieces. He is also connected, powerful. His request for the rail concession lands on my desk for a recommendation. He tapped a finger on the fraudulent bill of sale. This is how he operates. He finds weakness, creates confusion, and then presents himself as the solution, for a price. He has left a trail of broken men from here to New York. Broken men. The image of her father, Samuel Whitfield, rose before her, his vibrant eyes dimmed, his confident hands trembling as he signed over the last of their assets, believing the lies Price's associates spun. He died believing himself a failure, not a victim. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara's voice was a thread of sound. "Because you are the archivist. You found this file, you noted the discrepancy." He stated it plainly. "And because you did not flinch when I entered, you asked no favors, you showed no fear." He paused, a long, heavy silence. "I require someone with a keen eye and no obvious loyalty to Price's interests, someone he would not think to watch." The proposition was insane, dangerous. "I am the archivist for a law firm, General, not a spy for the Union Army. This is not espionage, it is auditing." He gathered the papers, his movements precise. Price's petition is a mountain of paperwork. Bills of lading, incorporation papers, tax receipts, a labyrinth designed to bore and confuse. I need someone who understands ledgers, who can see the story the numbers tell when the words lie. He finally stood, looming in the small space. "You would review copies in this room after hours. You would report only to me. No one would know. And if I refuse," he met her gaze without blinking, "then I will find another way, and you will return to your ledgers, wondering if you could have stopped a thief who will go on to steal from 100 others." It was a masterful stroke. He did not appeal to patriotism or duty. He appealed to the part of her that had spent 3 years meticulously putting numbers in their correct columns, restoring order to chaos, one entry at a time. He appealed to the ghost of her father, who had loved justice and been destroyed by its opposite. Clara looked at the documents on the table. They were just paper, but in their fibers she saw the ghost of her old life, the echo of her real name, Whitfield, a name she had buried to find work in this new, harsh world. "What is your interest?" she asked finally. "The rail concession? Military logistics?" For the first time, something flickered in his eyes that was not calculation. It was darker, more personal. "Price offered a bribe to a colonel under my command. The colonel refused. He was found dead in an alley 2 nights later. A tragic robbery, they said." Carlyle's jaw tightened. A minute movement. "I do not like thieves. I despise murderers who wear silk cravats." The raw, quiet venom in his voice was more convincing than any oath of honor. This was not just about duty. This was vengeance, cold and patient. Clara's eyes fell to the scarred table, to the shadow of the bundled papers. She thought of walking home in the rain, of the safety of invisibility. Then she thought of Nelson Price in a fine Boston coat, dining in some Charleston hotel, his hands clean. She lifted her chin, meeting the storm in his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" General Carlyle did not smile, but the intensity of his focus shifted, sharpened into something that might have been respect. "Start with this," he said, pushing a single sheet toward her. It was a list of companies, dates, and names. Cross-reference every name with the firm's archives. Look for any connection, any shared notary, any overlapping director. Look for the pattern. He moved to leave, then stopped at the door. "I will have the relevant copies delivered to you tomorrow. Burn your notes when you are done. Speak of this to no one." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Clara stood alone in the silent room. The weight of the secret was already settling on her shoulders. She looked down at the list in her hand. Halfway down, her eyes snagged on a company name, Meridian Transport and Holding. Her blood ran cold. It was the company that had swallowed her father's small shipping line whole. She was not just looking for a pattern for the general. She was following a trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to the ruins of her own life. And for the first time since she had become Clara Voss, the ghost saw a chance to speak. The following evening, the law office held a different kind of silence. It was no longer empty but charged, a vessel holding a secret. On the consultation room table, a new stack of papers sat, tied with plain twine, delivered by a silent corporal who had nodded once and left. Clara lit an extra lamp. The yellow glow pooled on the wood, pushing back the shadows that gathered in the corners. She untied the twine with careful fingers. The top sheet was a manifest for railroad ties, billed to the Price Consolidated Trust. Beneath it, land deeds, incorporation papers, promissory notes, a dry legal forest in which Nelson Price had hidden his traps. She began with the list General Carlyle had given her: Meridian Transport and Holding. The name was a splinter in her heart. She pulled the firm's master ledger for 1865-66 from the archives, her movements automatic, her mind a locked box. She would be an auditor, nothing more, a neutral eye. But neutrality shattered when she opened the ledger. Her father's handwriting leaped from the margins. It was in the small, precise notations he always made. Delay at Savannah Port. Union blockade. Captain Harris insists on hazard pay. Repair costs exceed estimate. See invoice from J. McCready. Samuel Whitfield's voice, captured in ink, a record of a man fighting to keep his world afloat. And then the entries changed. The neat script grew hurried, desperate. Loan secured against Star of Carolina, terms unfavorable. Payment to Price Consolidated, 30 days. The final entry, in shaky, sprawling letters that bore no resemblance to his usual hand, read, Assets transferred, all clear. It was dated 2 weeks before his death. Clara traced the words with a trembling finger. All clear. The bitter, final lie. She forced herself to breathe, to look past the grief to the numbers. The loan against his ship was from a bank called First Commercial of Charleston. She cross-referenced it with Carlyle's list. First Commercial appeared as a creditor on 3 other failing businesses Price had absorbed in the same month. A pattern, not of coincidence but of design. She worked for hours. The only sounds the rustle of paper and the scratch of her own notes on a separate sheet. She mapped connections with lines and question marks. The same notary public, the now deceased Mr. Jameson, dead since the winter of 1866, his license lapsed before the final fraudulent documents were ever signed, had witnessed an improbable number of these distressed sales. The same 2 lawyers, neither from Pembroke's reputable firm, had represented the buyers. A web, elegant and cruel, designed to drain wealth and leave the shells to collapse. The door to the main office opened. Clara froze, her pen hovering. Footsteps, too light to be the general's. She swiftly covered her notes with a blank sheet and pulled the firm's current ledger on top. Mr. Pembroke, her employer, peered in. He was a kind man, with tired eyes and ink-stained cuffs. Miss Voss? You are here late. Is everything in order? Yes, sir, she said, her voice thankfully steady. The quarterly reconciliations for the shipping accounts, they were more complex than anticipated. He nodded, his gaze drifting over the stacks of paper. For a terrifying moment, it lingered on the Price documents, their different paper stock visible at the edge of the pile. Ah, the general's work. He is a persistent man. Pembroke's tone was neutral, but a faint worry line appeared between his brows. He is making quite a study of certain northern investments. He seems thorough, Clara offered non-committally. Thoroughness can be a double-edged sword in these times, Miss Voss. Pembroke sighed, the weight of the Reconstruction world on his shoulders. We walk a narrow path between serving the law and offending the new powers. Be circumspect. Do not become entangled in matters beyond your station. It was a gentle warning, born of paternal concern. Of course, sir. Satisfied, he bid her good night and left. The silence he left behind was now tinged with fear. Entangled, she already was, down to her soul. She returned to her work with renewed urgency. In the payroll records for a defunct lumber mill Price had acquired, she found it. A single recurring entry, small enough to be overlooked. Regulatory facilitation, $200 monthly. It was paid to an initial. J.T., the notary, Jameson. He hadn't just been a witness, he'd been on the payroll. A bribed official creating backdated, fraudulent documents to make the theft look legal, and a conveniently dead one now, silenced by fever before anyone could question him. This was the proof, the linchpin. The street outside was fully dark when she finally leaned back, her eyes burning. She had it. A clear, documented trail of fraud that connected Price to the deliberate ruin of at least 5 businesses, including her father's. She stared at her notes. the pattern now a glaring, undeniable map of corruption. The outer door opened again. These footsteps she recognized. Heavy, measured, inevitable. General Carlyle entered the consultation room without knocking. He brought the night chill with him, and a tension that vibrated in the small space. He had discarded his formal coat. He wore his dark blue tunic, unbuttoned at the throat, and a look of grim fatigue. Well, the single word was gravel. Wordlessly, Clara pushed her notes toward him. Then the key piece of evidence, the payroll ledger with the monthly payments to J.T. She pointed to the corresponding fraudulent documents witnessed by Jameson. Carlyle did not sit. He stood by the lamp, his face in sharp relief as he read. She watched his eyes move down the page, saw the moment they caught the significance of the payment. A muscle in his jaw feathered. He flipped to her network of connections, his gaze darting across her lines and annotations. For a long minute he was utterly still, absorbing the scope of it. "You found the vein," he said finally, his voice low with something like awe. He was paying the notary to legitimize the theft. "It's more than that," Clara found herself saying, her professional detachment crumbling. She tapped the ledger entry for Meridian Transport. This company, the owner, Samuel Whitfield, he didn't just fail, he was targeted. The loan terms were impossible. The notary backdated the final sale documents to a date when Whitfield was already too ill to comprehend them. They stole it from him while he was dying. The words spilled out, hot and sharp. She had not meant to say so much. Carlyle's eyes lifted from the paper to her face. He studied her, the fierce light in her eyes, the tremor she could not suppress in her hands. He saw not just an archivist, but a woman with a personal ghost in the room. "Whitfield," he repeated slowly. "You knew him." It was too late to lie. The ledger was there, with her father's tragic margin notes. She gave a single, tight nod. "He was my father." The admission hung in the air, a confession that changed everything. She was no longer a neutral clerk. She was a claimant. Carlyle did not express sympathy. He did not offer hollow condolences. He simply absorbed the fact, filing it away as critical intelligence. "This alters your risk," he stated. "If Price discovers you are Samuel Whitfield's daughter, and that you are examining these papers, I am aware." She cut him off, her voice hard. "But it also means I have a vested interest in seeing this through, correctly." A near imperceptible nod. He respected that. This evidence is enough to deny his rail concession, perhaps even to initiate a federal fraud investigation. He gathered her notes and the crucial ledger page. "I will take these." "No." The word stopped him. He looked at her, startled. "You cannot just take a client's ledger from the firm," she said, a sudden fierce protectiveness over the proof surging within her. "It would be theft. It would compromise the case. And it would lead Price directly back to me." She held out her hand. "I will make a certified copy. Tonight. The copy you can take. The original must remain in its file with no one the wiser." He looked at her outstretched hand, then into her determined face. For the first time, something akin to a real expression softened the severe lines around his eyes. Not a smile, but a recognition of an equal will. He placed the papers back into her hand, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, electric. "For you are right," he conceded, the words seeming unfamiliar on his tongue. "Make the copy." He did not leave. He stood by the window, watching the empty street as she worked. Clara's hands were steady now, driven by purpose. She meticulously transcribed the damning entries, her pen moving with swift certainty. The silence between them was no longer empty, it was filled with a shared, dangerous purpose. When she finished, she sanded the ink and handed him the fresh sheet. The copy, witnessed and dated by the archivist of Pembroke and Sons. He took it, folded it carefully, and placed it inside his tunic. "He will retaliate when the concession is denied," Carlyle said, his voice a low rumble. "He will look for a weakness, for someone to blame." "Let him look," Clara said, the ghost of her father lending strength to her voice. "The numbers do not lie." He studied her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face in the lamplight, the resolve in her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin. "From now on," he said, "you take my carriage home. Every night. That is not an offer. It is an order." It was not about chivalry. It was about protecting an asset, a witness. Clara knew this, and yet the command, delivered in that tone of absolute certainty, felt like a shield being placed around her. She did not refuse. For the first time, she did not refuse. She simply nodded, a quiet, undefended decision, different from all her careful calculations before it. She was tired of walking alone in the dark. He turned to go, then paused once more. Without looking back, he said, "The work you did tonight, it was exceptional, Miss Voss." Then he was gone, dissolving into the darkness of the outer office. Clara sat alone, the echo of his praise warming a place inside her that had been cold for years. She carefully returned the original ledger to its place, erasing all traces of her nocturnal audit. But as she cleaned the pen and extinguished the lamps, she knew nothing would ever be the same. The ghost had stepped into the light, and the general, the stern embodiment of the conquering power, had become her unlikely ally. She walked to the front window and looked out. As promised, a closed military carriage waited at the curb, a dark shape against the gaslit street. The driver sat motionless, waiting for her. For the first time since coming to Charleston, Clara Voss did not walk home alone in the dark. The military carriage became a silent feature of Clara's evenings. It would materialize at the curb on Broad Street as dusk settled, its driver a taciturn man named Sergeant Lowe, who nodded once and spoke only to confirm her address. The ride was short, cloistered, and utterly secure. It was also a cage of gilded obligation. Inside the consultation room, the work continued, but the dynamic had shifted. General Carlyle no longer simply delivered documents and departed. He would arrive sometimes with new files, sometimes with specific questions that showed he was following parallel lines of inquiry. He would stand by the window or lean against the doorframe, a brooding presence, while she worked. One such evening, a week after she had uncovered the notary's bribe, he entered with a different energy. Tension radiated from him like heat from a stove. "Price has been denied the primary rail concession," he said without preamble, placing his hat on the table. The evidence of fraudulent practice was compelling. The board in Washington agreed. A victory. Clara felt a sharp, vindictive thrill. "Then it's over." "It is not over," he countered, his voice flat. "It is the end of the beginning. He has already applied for a smaller, secondary line using a different corporate entity. He is adapting." Carlyle turned to face her, his expression grim. "And he has begun asking questions, discreetly, about who might have had access to the archived records that formed the basis of the denial." A chill traced Clara's spine. "Does he suspect the firm?" "He suspects a leak. He is putting pressure on Pembroke, suggesting his firm's loyalty to the new economic order is lacking." Carlyle's eyes held hers. "Your employer is a cautious man. He may decide to reduce his exposure." Reduce his exposure. The euphemism was clear. Clara's hands, resting on an innocuous shipping manifest, went cold. Her position, her fragile security, was now a piece on the board. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "Do you?" He took a step closer, not threatening but intense. This is the moment when men like Price become dangerous. The polite veneer cracks. He will look for a pressure point. "I have none," Clara lied, the image of her father's ledger burning in her mind. "Everyone has one," Carlyle stated. He studied her for a long moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "Regardless, your situation here is now precarious. I have taken a liberty." Clara's head snapped up. "What liberty?" "I reviewed the contract for the firm's provision of archival services to the federal garrison. It is up for renewal. I made it known that the efficiency and accuracy of the service, specifically the work done on the Price matter, was a significant factor in my recommendation for renewal." He spoke as if discussing troop movements. "The contract was renewed this morning, for a term of 3 years." She stared at him, stunned. He had intervened, not with a word to Pembroke, but with the cold leverage of federal contracts. He had guaranteed her job not through plea, but through power. Her safety was now, indirectly, tied to his continued satisfaction. "You had no right," she breathed, a flush of anger and shame heating her cheeks. "I did not ask for your protection. You did not have to," he replied, unmoved. "It was a tactical necessity. Your continued access here is vital, and your dismissal at this juncture would have been a vulnerability." He paused, and his tone shifted, a fraction softer. "It also happens to be just. Your work was instrumental. You deserve to face no reprisal for it." The anger bled away, leaving confusion in its wake. He was a paradox, a conqueror who wielded power with brutal efficiency, yet seemed governed by a rigid internal code of fairness. He had protected her, but in doing so had reminded her of her dependence. "Thank you," she forced out, the words strange and stiff. He acknowledged it with a slight dip of his chin. "Do not thank me. Continue the work. Price's new corporate entity is called Low Country Transport Solutions. Find its roots." He left soon after, but his presence lingered. Clara tried to focus on the new stack of papers, but her mind whirled. She learned of his intervention from Mr. Pembroke the next day, though her employer knew only half the story. "Excellent news, Miss Voss," Pembroke said, looking relieved as he stood in her office doorway. "The garrison contract has been renewed. General Carlyle's office spoke quite highly of our thoroughness. It seems your diligent work has been noticed at the highest level here." He smiled, but it was edged with nervous curiosity. "It is good to have friends in high places, is it not?" "It was not friendship. It was a transaction." Clara smiled back, a brittle imitation. "Indeed, sir." The news, however, seemed to ripple through invisible channels. 2 days later, as Clara was leaving at the end of the business day, early as there were no secret documents to study, she encountered a man in the building's foyer. He was expensively dressed in a suit of fine wool, his beard trimmed to a sharp point, his eyes a pale, calculating blue. He held a silver-tipped cane, not for support, but as an accessory. He was studying a directory board, but turned as she passed. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice smooth as Boston cream. "Might you direct me to the offices of Pembroke and Sons? I have an appointment, but I fear I'm early." Something in his tone, in the way his eyes swept over her with dismissive appraisal before locking onto her face, set off a silent alarm. Clara kept her expression blank. "Up the stairs, first door on the left." "My thanks." He smiled, a thin stretching of lips. "You are a clerk there, perhaps? You have the efficient air." "I am the archivist," she corrected, the title a shield. "Ah, the keeper of secrets." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "A vital role in these times of reconstruction. Good day." He tipped his hat and moved toward the stairs. Clara stood frozen for a second, then hurried out into the street, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew him. She had never seen him before, but she knew him. The description matched, and the aura of polished venom was unmistakable. Nelson Price. He had come to look, to see the source of the leak with his own eyes. Her anonymity, her greatest armor, was crumbling. That night in the consultation room, she told Carlyle. He had been examining a map, but at her description he went very still. "He was assessing you," Carlyle said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He may have had you followed. The carriage is now a necessity, not a precaution." He rolled up the map with sharp, forceful movements. "From tomorrow, Sergeant Lowe will also collect you in the morning." "General, that is too much. It will draw more attention, not less." "It will draw my attention," he corrected, his gaze burning into hers. "And it will signal to him that you are under my protection. He is a bully. He preys on the isolated. He will think twice before moving against someone clearly under the garrison's wing." "I am not a soldier in your command," she protested, though the argument felt weak. "In this, you are," he stated, leaving no room for debate. "You entered this fight when you deciphered his ledger. You do not get to choose when you lay down the weapon." He moved to the door, then stopped, his back to her. "He will try another way. He will dig. Be prepared." The warning was prophetic. 3 days later, a different kind of document found its way to her desk, delivered by the regular post. It was not a business paper. It was a society page clipped from a Boston newspaper, 2 years old. It announced the bankruptcy and subsequent death of the once respected merchant, Samuel Whitfield, noting the tragic decline of a Southern gentleman unable to adapt to the new order. At the bottom of the clipping, In a neat, anonymous hand was written a single line: "A familiar story of failure, is it not, Miss Voss?" The message was clear. He knew. He had connected Clara Voss, the efficient archivist, to Samuel Whitfield's disgraced daughter. He was showing her his knowledge and his contempt. Clara's blood turned to ice. She sat at her desk, the mundane noises of the office fading into a hum. The past, which she had buried so carefully, had been exhumed and laid on her blotter like a corpse. She did not wait for evening. She sent a brief formal note to the garrison headquarters. "Have received personal correspondence of an unsettling nature, relevant to our mutual concern. Will await your convenience. C. Voss." He came within the hour. He read the clipping in silence, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. When he looked up, his eyes were the color of a winter sea before a storm. "This is his pressure point," Carlyle said, his voice lethally calm. He folded the clipping and placed it in his pocket. "He is threatening to expose your history, to shame you, to make you unemployable, a personal ruin to mirror your father's." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "Very well." He straightened his tunic, a gesture she now recognized as him girding for battle. "He has declared the field of engagement. We will respond." He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the cold fury was replaced by something else, a fierce, protective certainty. "You will not face this alone, do you understand? No matter what comes next." It was not a question of tactics this time. It was a vow. Clara, surrounded by the ghosts of her father's failure and the looming shadow of Price's malice, found herself clinging to that vow like a lifeline. She nodded again, her eyes meeting his. The war was no longer just about fraud or rail lines. It had become personal for them both, and General Edmund Carlyle, for all his controlled silence, had just drawn a line in the sand. The clipping was a declaration of war. The genteel, paper-shuffling conflict was over. Nelson Price had aimed for the heart, and in doing so, he had miscalculated. He had assumed Clara Voss was alone. She was not. General Carlyle's presence became a fortress. The morning carriage was not a discreet affair, it was a statement. A Union Army wagon, with an armed private beside Sergeant Lowe, now waited for her at her boarding house. It delivered her directly to the steps of Pembroke and Sons. The message was unmistakable. She was under the protection, and by extension, the scrutiny, of the federal garrison. Inside the office, a new kind of tension hummed. Mr. Pembroke looked at her with a mixture of awe and anxiety. "Miss Voss, the General's attentiveness is most remarkable. Is there something regarding the contract work I should be aware of? Something that might invite controversy?" "The work is complex, sir," Clara replied, her voice a model of calm she did not feel. "The General values accuracy. He ensures it is not disrupted." It was not a lie, but it felt like one. Price did not appear again in person. His next move was more insidious. It arrived in the form of a letter to the editor published in the Charleston Courier, a paper sympathetic to the old order. It did not name her, but its target was clear. "It is a sad commentary on our present state," the letter read, "when the fate of honest Northern investment is decided not on its merits, but on the whispered accusations of unnamed clerks, perhaps those with personal grievances rooted in the lost cause. Should the future of the South be held hostage by the embittered children of its failed past?" The words were a poisoned dart. Clara read it at her desk, the newsprint smudging under her damp fingers. Embittered children. He was painting her as a vengeful Southern sympathizer, sabotaging Northern progress. It was a brilliant, cruel twist. He was using the very prejudices of the era to discredit her. Carlyle entered the office that afternoon without knocking, a folded copy of the Courier in his hand. His expression was carved from granite. "You have seen it." "Yes." "He seeks to isolate you, to make you a symbol of Southern obstructionism. If he can turn public sentiment even a little, it creates pressure." He tossed the paper onto her desk. "We must pivot. The defense is no longer just about the fraud. It is about your name." Clara looked up, weary. "My name is Voss, a name I chose for its silence." "It is a ghost's name," he said, not unkindly. "And ghosts cannot fight battles. Samuel Whitfield's daughter can." He leaned on her desk, his presence overwhelming the small space. "We must reclaim the narrative. We must prove you are not embittered but wronged, that your grievance is not Southern nostalgia, but a demand for justice any Northerner or Southerner should recognize." "How?" The word was a whisper. "You will sign your next report to me with your real name, Clara Whitfield, and you will find me one piece of evidence that is not just about fraud, but about the method. Something that shows Price's pattern so clearly that your personal connection becomes irrelevant, or rather, becomes proof of his wider cruelty." He was asking her to resurrect herself, to step out of the protective shadow of Voss and into the glaring light as Whitfield's daughter. It was terrifying. "And if I cannot?" "Then he wins," Carlyle said simply. "He will smear you, the concession will be granted on a wave of manipulated sentiment, and he will continue. Your father's name will remain mud, and a dozen more fathers will join him." He left her with that ultimatum. That night, in the consultation room, Clara did not open the new files on low-country transport solutions. Instead, she unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk and took out the worn, soft-covered notebook, her father's ledger. She had not opened it since the night she found the connection to Price. It was too painful. Now she laid her palm on its cover, feeling the faint impression of her father's hand. This was not just a record of decline, it was a record of a man. She had to read it not as an archivist but as a daughter. She began at the beginning. The early entries were hopeful, filled with plans for new routes. Then came the first mention of PCT, Price Consolidated Trust, offering a line of credit. The terms were tight but manageable. Then notes of unexplained delays with other creditors, sudden calls on notes. Her father's confusion bled into the margins. "JT insists the lien is in order, but I cannot find the original. Bank claims no record of extension. JT the notary, Jameson." He was there in her father's personal notes, a wolf in notary's clothing. And then she found it. Tucked between pages near the end, a loose slip of paper, brittle and folded. It was not in her father's hand. It was a hurried, anonymous scrawl, a message passed in a street or a tavern. "Whitfield, JT is bought. The loan docs are forged. Price means to have your ship. Go to the authorities. A friend." A warning. A friend had tried to alert him. Clara's breath caught. Her father had kept this. Had he believed it? Had he tried to go to the authorities? The occupying authorities in 1865 would have been Union officers, busy with martial law, unlikely to care about a complex financial dispute between a Southerner and a Northern speculator. But this changed everything. This wasn't just a cold financial fraud, this was a conspiracy with a witness. Someone else had known. Someone had tried to stop it. This was the evidence Carlyle needed. It tied Price directly to a knowing, malicious plot to ruin a specific man. It moved the crime from the ledger to the human heart. Her hands trembled as she carefully copied the note, describing its placement in the journal. She believed she knew who had written it. Macready, the repair contractor her father had employed for 11 years, whose name appeared in the earliest hopeful margin notes. A man who would have known. A man who lacked the courage to come forward openly, but could not stay entirely silent. He had died in 1869 of fever, taking his certainty with him. But he had left what he could, where her father would find it. It was enough to know. At the bottom of her report she hesitated, the pen poised. Then, with a steadying breath, she signed not Clara Voss, but Clara Whitfield. The name looked strange and powerful on the page. A reclamation. When Carlyle came that night, she handed him the report without a word. He read it swiftly, his eyes widening slightly at the signature. Then he read the description of the warning note. When he finished, he looked at her, a new, fierce respect in his gaze. "This friend," Carlyle said, "could not have known the legal specifics without proximity to the transaction. A lawyer, a bank officer, or someone who processed the documents." "Macready," Clara said quietly. "My father's contractor. He knew everything. He was not a brave man, but he was not entirely silent." Carlyle nodded, absorbing this. "He is dead." "Yes, but the note exists, in my father's own journal. It is corroborating testimony, not from a hostile witness, but from a man with no legal standing and no reason to fabricate. She paused. It shows Price knew. It was not opportunism. It was targeted destruction. Carlyle set the report down. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "This, combined with the Jameson payroll record and the deposition I have secured from the former bank officer in Savannah, is sufficient for a federal indictment." Clara went very still. A deposition? From a man named Aldred, a former clerk at First Commercial. He left Charleston in early 1867 after Price's associates began making inquiries about his whereabouts. He has been in Savannah since, waiting for someone willing to hear him. Carlyle's voice was even clinical. He will testify that loan terms were altered after original signing on at least 4 accounts, including your father's. The information arrived like a slow tide rather than a wave. Clara had carried the weight of her father's ruin for so long that its lightening came not as relief, but as a kind of vertigo, the sudden absence of something she had organized her entire body around. "You found him," she said. "You went to Savannah." I sent a man," he corrected, with the same precision he brought to everything. She looked at him. He did not look away. He never looked away, she had noticed. He met every gaze as he met everything, directly and without apology. "When?" she asked. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, before the clipping, before Price appeared in the foyer, before she had signed her real name to anything. He had already been building her case in the background without a word. "You did not tell me." "No," he said simply. She understood then what he would never say aloud. He had not told her because he had not been certain it would succeed. He would not raise her hopes on an uncertain operation. He had waited until he had something solid to place in her hands. It was the same precision with which he commanded men. No unnecessary information until the objective was secured. It was, she thought, the most careful thing anyone had ever done for her. She did not thank him. She knew by now that he did not want thanks. She simply gathered the report, added the deposition copy he handed her, and began cross-referencing names. They worked until the church bells struck midnight. When she finally set down her pen, the room was thick with the particular silence of shared exhaustion. He was at the window. She was at the table. The lamp between them burned low. "We are ready," she said. "Nearly," he replied without turning. "Price will have one more move. He always does." He was right. Price's final move came on a Thursday, arriving not as a letter this time, but as a consequence. Mr. Pembroke called Clara into his office at 9 in the morning. He stood behind his desk, his hands folded, his face carrying the expression of a man who had made a decision that cost him something. On his desk lay a copy of a legal notice, freshly delivered, from a firm Clara did not recognize. "Miss Voss," he began, and then stopped, corrected himself. "Miss Whitfield." The name in his mouth, her real name, spoken in this office for the first time, landed like a stone in still water. "He came to me," Pembroke said. "Price. Last evening. He knows who you are. He has known for some time." He pushed the legal notice across the desk. "He has filed a complaint with the Federal Civilian Oversight Board, alleging that you illegally accessed confidential client documents and passed them to the military garrison. He is naming me as a co-conspirator for allowing it." Clara read the document. It was precise, well-constructed, and largely false. The legal mechanism was real enough. The complaint, if not answered, would result in the firm losing its federal operating license within 30 days. "I see," she said. "I must ask you to leave your position," Pembroke said. The words were quiet and his eyes did not meet hers. "I am deeply sorry. You have been the most capable person in this office for 2 years. But I have my son to consider and—" He stopped. A particular stillness had come over his face, the expression of a man who has said one word too many. Clara set down the legal notice. "Your son," she repeated gently. "J. Alderman Pembroke, Jr., Director of Low Country Transport Solutions." The blood left Pembroke's face. "I found it 3 days ago," she said. "In the incorporation papers. I did not use it. I will not use it. unless he forces my hand. She folded the legal notice and placed it in her bag beside the worn notebook. But I think you understand now, sir, that Price is not protecting you. He is using you. And when he is finished, your son's name will be in those papers as a director of a fraudulent enterprise, and yours will be attached to it by silence. Pembroke sat down heavily as if the bones had gone out of him. The only way to protect your son, Clara said, is to cooperate with the federal investigation, voluntarily, with your own attorney present, before Price can frame the story. She stood. I will collect my things. She was at the door when Pembroke spoke. Miss Whitfield. She turned. I should have done better by you, he said, from the beginning. Yes, she said. You should have. She walked out of Pembroke & Sons without ceremony. Sergeant Lowe was at the curb. She got in. She did not look back at the building. At Garrison headquarters, Carlyle was in his office when she arrived. He took one look at her face and closed the door. She told him everything, the legal complaint, Pembroke Jr.'s directorship, the conversation. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Pembroke will cooperate, he said. Not a question. Yes, he is frightened and he is decent. He will cooperate. Then Price has lost his legal flank. Carlyle moved to his desk, pulling a prepared file from the top drawer. The Federal Judge Advocate's Office received our full submission yesterday. The Jameson payroll records, the Savannah deposition, your certified copies, the warning note from your father's journal, and your signed testimony. He paused. Under your real name. Clara absorbed this. It is filed. It is filed. The indictment will be issued within the week. His accounts will be frozen pending proceedings. The rail concession, both applications, are suspended. And the complaint against me? A counter-filing has already been submitted by the Judge Advocate's Office, noting that the complaint is consistent with a pattern of witness intimidation documented in the broader fraud case. He set the file down. It will not proceed. Clara sat in the chair across from his desk, a chair she had never used before, always standing, always ready to leave. Now she simply sat. The October light came through the window at its long gold angle, lying across the floor between them. It is almost over, she said. The legal portion, he agreed. Yes. She looked up at him. He was watching her with that steady, unreadable attention she had catalogued over months, the attention that recorded everything and released nothing. Pembroke appeared voluntarily the following morning, she said, when the silence had stretched long enough, before the summons could be served. I know. His attorney contacted my office at 7. You read him accurately, she said, and heard as she said it the echo of his own words returned to him. Accurately. The word he used when he meant something deeper than a compliment. Something shifted in his face. The smallest thing. The recognition of his own language in her mouth. You taught me that word, she said quietly. The way you use it. He did not answer, but he did not look away. The verdict from Washington arrived on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the indictment was filed. A federal courier came to Garrison headquarters in the early afternoon with a sealed dispatch. Clara was in the archival room. She had been working there since leaving Pembroke's under a formal federal contract, her name on the Garrison rolls as Clara Whitfield, certified archivist. The position had existed, Carlyle had said, for 3 days before her dismissal. She had not asked when he had created it. She already knew. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. She always heard them now, knew their weight and pace the way she knew the sound of a specific pen on a specific paper. He entered without knocking, as he always did, and held out the dispatch. She read it standing. Price convicted on 7 counts of federal fraud. Restitution ordered. Asset transfers involving named victims to be reviewed for recovery. And there, in official federal type, the name she had carried like a wound for 3 years, Samuel Whitfield, merchant, Charleston, SC, victim of documented fraud, record amended accordingly. She read it twice, slowly, let every word do its full work. Then she folded it along its original creases and held it out to him. Keep it, Carlyle said. She looked at him. It belongs with you, he said. With his ledger. She placed it inside the cover of the worn notebook. The notebook went into her bag. She moved to the east window and stood looking out at the harbour, the way she had stood at windows all her life, watching the world from the careful distance of someone who could not afford to be in it fully. The harbour was flat and silver in the afternoon light. A cargo ship moved slowly toward the channel mouth, its wake spreading in two long lines behind it, white against grey water. "I should like to use my name," she said to the window. "Clara Whitfield. I should like to stop being Voss." "Then do," he said behind her. "It will require amended records, new employment papers." "Already prepared," he said, "pending your signature." She turned. He was standing at the table, not at the window, not at the door. He had not moved toward her. He was simply there in the middle of the room, as if he had nowhere particular to be and no urgency about being there. She had learned to read this in him. His stillness was not absence, it was the opposite. She had spent months filing observations of this man, the way he stood at windows after she left rooms, the way he said accurately when he meant something he lacked another word for, the way he had sent a man to Savannah 3 weeks before she knew it was necessary, and said nothing until he had something solid to place in her hands. The file was complete. The pattern was unmistakable. She took one step toward him. Not large, just one. He did not move away. "You watched from the window," she said. "That first evening, until I was gone." "Yes. I knew," she said. "I didn't look back, but I knew." Something crossed his face. Not surprise, but a recognition of being seen, which was rarer to him than surprise. "Then why did you not—" "Because I had learned," she said, "that things which appear to be one thing are often another. I had learned to verify before I believed." The corners of his eyes moved, very slightly. It was as close as he came. "And now?" "Now I have sufficient evidence," she said. He closed the remaining distance, not impulsively and with the same deliberate quiet that governed everything he did. His hand came up to the side of her face, careful and certain at once. She felt the warmth of it against her cheek, the slight roughness of his palm. She did not step back. She had been stepping back for 3 years. She was done with it. When he kissed her, it was unhurried, as if they had all the time that had been withheld from both of them for years, and he intended to use it with the same precision he brought to everything that mattered. She felt the tension in him, the long-practiced containment, and the deliberate choice to release it, one careful degree at a time. Afterward, they stood in the slanted October light, his forehead resting against hers, both of them still. Below the window, Charleston went about its afternoon. Carriages on cobblestones, the cry of harbour birds, the smell of salt air and wood smoke rising from the street. The garrison bell marked the hour. "Stay," he said, one word with everything in it. Clara thought of the boarding house, the bare room, the years of careful invisibility. She thought of walking alone in the rain while a man watched from a window and said nothing because he did not yet have the words. She thought of her father's handwriting in the margins of a ledger, the voice of a man who had fought and lost and left a record of it. She thought of All Clear, the last thing he had written, the bitter, exhausted surrender of it. And she thought that it need not mean that the same words in a different life could mean something else entirely, not the end of resistance, but the end of the need for it, not surrender, arrival. "Yes," she said. On the table behind them, the worn notebook lay where she had set it, its cover soft with years of handling. The harbour light fell across it, illuminating the final page, her father's last entry, in the shaky hand of a man at the end of his strength. All clear. For the first time since she had read those words, they did not break her heart.
I learned to live when no one stayed, a quiet name I chose to fade. I built my walls from dust and pain, and walked through life in silent rain. No one asked, no one knew the weight I carried, what I'd been through. I wasn't waiting to be saved, I only learned how to be brave. Then you stood there like you saw through everything. You didn't ask me who I was, you didn't try to fix my scars. You just stayed where others ran and held the truth inside my hands. I never needed saving, it's true, but I was tired of fighting alone. And somewhere between the dark and you, I learned I wasn't on my own. Ooh, oh. Your spoken lines in measured ways, like every word was meant to stay. A soldier heart, a guarded soul, but I could see what you controlled. Not just duty, not just war, there was something you were fighting for. And in your silence I could feel the kind of love that doesn't kneel. I tried to stay like I always do, but you didn't let me disappear. You made the truth come into light. You gave my name a voice again and stood with me when I would fight. I never needed saving, it's true, but I was breaking on my own. And somewhere between the war and you, inside the rain. You never asked me to be less. You never needed me to bend. You only stayed, you only stayed until I chose you in the end. You didn't take, you didn't claim, you never tried to own my name. You just stood where no one would and loved me strong and loved me good. I never needed saving, it's true, but I was tired of standing alone. And somewhere between the truth and you, I found a place that felt like home. Never yours to say, but you stayed, and that was everything.